Hello, welcome to the podcast of Startup Recruitment Failures. I'm Indra, founder and CEO of JobRely. We're building LinkedIn automation platform for outbound recruitment. And today my guest is Andrius Šlimas, ex-director of product at Shopify. Andrius, could you please introduce yourself?
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the show. And my name is Andrius. I've been working with e-commerce my whole professional life. I was building software as a service for e-commerce. And then one of our products was called Oberlo. It's a dropshipping automation app. And which got fairly successful pretty fast. And we sold that company to Shopify, which is one of the largest e-commerce companies and one of the largest Canadian company. And after the acquisition, I worked there for a bit over 4 years as a director of product.
And do I remember correctly that Oberlo was like an accident, basically? You were testing many products you were created back then, and here it is. This one just happened to be a very successful one.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, we built, because we were running e-commerce businesses ourselves as well, not just building software, but we were also running e-commerce stores. And we built this automation for ourselves. And that e-commerce business was fairly successful. And then we thought that, okay, this tech, it helped a lot. So why don't we just, bring it to the market? Maybe someone else will find any use of it. And in fact, we launched it. And I mean, within a week, I guess we had tons of users and revenue, and we immediately started growing, and the growth was super fast.
This is really amazing. I love these kind of stories, I wish for everyone would happen as such. And so you grew from what number into what number of employees?
So I think when we started, we were like maybe 7 or 5 people around that. And then I think within the first year, we were, 30 people. And I guess important to note that 30 people, of which I guess 3 were in Berlin. And then we already started opening an office in China, in Shenzhen. So we really started scaling very fast and across all the different regions and so on. And then shortly after, maybe after another year, we were 150 people across 3 locations. And also by that time, we were part of a larger Shopify organization. Yeah, but Oberlo grew, I think, really fast within the first year and a half to different locations and different teams.
And after how many years from launching your product, you got acquired by Shopify?
Well, so again, that happened super fast. We were, I think, less than a year, maybe 11 months old when we got approached by Shopify. And then they said, hey, guys, do you want to work with us?
Right.
And we, of course, said, okay, well, we're probably one of the coolest companies. So we, of course, want to work with you. And then we decided to sell. And then we sold the company shortly after. So we were barely 1 year old when we went from everything happened so fast. We went from nothing to totally irrelevant small team in Lithuania and Vilnius, 5-7 people, to, within a year being acquired by one of the largest e-commerce brands and having offices in China and in Berlin and everywhere else. So it was super fast. And I think, by the way, I guess this is why it might be useful for our learnings, might be useful for people, for listeners of this podcast, because we went really from zero, from knowing nothing and having no experience and having nothing, no momentum, anything, to actually being part of a massive company within a year. And in that process, we made every possible mistake and learned a lot and had to figure out how to make these things work. So I think tons of learnings, and super happy to share some of it.
Yeah, thank you very much for participating and sharing your learnings. So what could you emphasize? What was the, I don't know, not maybe the biggest, but the one which you learned most?
Yeah. So I think the problem is that the amount of mistakes that we made, and they are all consequential in their own right. And I thought that maybe it's, instead of focusing on individual mistakes, I think it's more important maybe to recognize the type of mistakes that you make at the different stages. And so I wrote down some of the thoughts and with some of the examples. And I thought maybe I'll just go through that.
Great.
So when we initially started, and I think that happens to all of the companies that start growing, when you start hiring outside of your immediate network, outside of your friends and someone that you know, you get a good impression of people coming from big companies or big tech companies. So like if you hear an engineer from Facebook or an engineer from Google, then that makes an immediate impression on you, and you think, okay, that necessarily means an amazing engineer, because there are no bad engineers at Google. So when we initially got candidates or applicants from booking.com and somewhere else, we thought, okay, gosh, these people, they must know everything. Like they've seen everything, like they know how big companies work, like how successful tech startups work. So if we hire them, they're going to change everything. Like this person is the smartest I've ever seen or ever talked. But more often than not, and in our own experience, it like you have inverted correlation with the quality and the name, right? And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. First of all, you have to admit that there are a lot of mediocre people in large companies because it's so much easier to fly under the radar in large companies, right? So you just don't fight with anyone and you're fine.
Yeah.
Second, talented people have hard times having real impact in big companies because of the dependencies and so on. And also, it's a different ball game in the large companies. In large companies, you're dependent. It's a lot about communication, about politics, about positioning yourself or your project. So it's a different breed. So your expectations that there is someone will be super experienced is not necessarily true. So I think you have to be super careful with hiring big names. And again, more often than not, this will not work out as you expect.
Not to be blinded by a company brand, right?
Yeah, it's this halo effect, right? Like when, you get impressed by that.
Exactly.
But you have to go way beyond that point.
Yeah.
And not just a good impression, right? And I think then the second one, which is a very related point, is understanding that, a candidate's profile or their past experience or their track record matches what you need. So let's assume that you actually were correct identifying a talented person. So they did have impact in their company. Maybe they worked on a project that changed everything for the company, or they came in and then they fixed the whole marketing and that company became super successful. But it's not enough, right, to just hire a great marketing leader and think that now it's going to be the same for your company. You have to question, what kind of marketing they were doing. Like what were their budgets? What was the team and so on? And do you have exactly the same thing? If their experience is in content and SEO and you're like affiliate network-based product, like it's a totally different breed, and they likely not going to have any impact. And I have a fairly almost like a comical situation where we had an executive search company, and they found someone super senior and super just spot on, perfect fit for us. And then I met that person. I spent a lot of time chatting with them, and I thought, okay, it is just too good to be true. And then we hired him, and he was very smart. But the problem was that, in the previous company, he had a team of 200 people, and he had the whole supporting infrastructure. He had assistants and everything. So he was overlooking everything from 30,000 feet. And what we needed is someone being in the weeds and figuring out and doing things.
Yeah.
And that was, in the hindsight, it was obvious, but we didn't really ask all of these questions, and we didn't really, we thought, okay, this is a really decent hire, a very talented person with a track record, but their profile, their work ethics and everything didn't match our need. And I think this is also very common mistake of all of the early stage startups, just going for track record and going for names.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, sometimes it's very difficult to decide because you have to make some exceptions, right? There cannot be an ideal profile for your company.
Sure, yeah.
And you cannot ask all the questions in the very beginning, right? Because you don't know all the questions yet.
Yeah.
Maybe after the failure, you know better, but still. So how to make the exceptions in the right way that it's good, maybe the sector does not matter so much, but to to be strict, and what, I don't know, characteristics or requirements you still have to be very strict about?
I think it's more important to be aware of it. It's not necessarily that, if they haven't done content marketing, that they won't be able to do content marketing or won't be able to build a team which does that. Yeah. So I think it's fine. I think it's more of you getting blindsided by something that, on paper, everything looks great, but then you realize that actually your setup maybe is a bit different. Yeah. So I think it's not necessarily like a hard rule that you cannot breach, but it's very good to be aware of that, like really trying to understand, will this person be successful in my setting, in my environment? And that's again related with the first point of like, if you're coming from a large company, the skill set that is required there is totally different from what you need in a very small startup. Yeah. So I think just being very aware of that.
Yeah, that's why I actually really like scorecards, where you basically list accountabilities for that position needed to be occupied and responsible for. And you interview a candidate in a way to understand whether the person will be capable to be accountable for that or not. So then I believe it's easier to check the whether expectations of both sides matches. And it's even easier to interview, right? Instead of putting the qualifications you need to put the tick on.
Sure. Yeah. And also going just really deeper into their experience. So sometimes, you can ask a question: have you done this or that, or like, what was the most impactful project you worked on, or whatever? And then they can explain something that, okay, we did this or that, and it had this effect, and so on. But if you really delve deeper into what they specifically have done in that project, it might be that their contribution to that wasn't that great. So again, I think it is important to pay a lot of attention to this.
Yeah. Okay, what were the other learnings you had?
So I guess these two first things were like a very common mistakes and clear mistakes that you do in the very early stage. Later on, when we started sort of growing a bit and increasing the funnel of the applicants, or just receiving more applications and spending maybe a bit more time or money or resources advertising our positions, we started getting lots of applications from all over the world. And it's a bit hard to admit, but like, I think I wasn't really fighting all of the internal biases good enough. And very soon I realized that because of all of the like a low quality applications, mostly coming from like a large countries like India or Pakistan or somewhere from South America, very quickly I started just automatically disregarding it. So if it's coming from there, it must be noise. I discard it and look for something else. And then we hired at some point a CTO, and then he started going through all of these applications. And it was surprising how many brilliant engineers and product people he found in that batch. So yes, just because of the sheer volumes, you get a lot of noise, but there are a lot of signal or a lot of, perfectly talented people in that batch. So it's terrible that you are denying an opportunity for someone because of your biases, just because, the country or gender or whatever that is. But you're also just losing an opportunity to hire a really talented person. And for you, like, it all comes down to like who you hire. So if you have to do everything that it takes to find like these hidden talented persons. So if that means going through 500 applications, then so be it. You have to go through 500 applications and find them. And, at some point we had 70 people in our Berlin office. We had 2 Germans. And all of them were coming either from South America or from like all over the world. And we were bringing so many talented, brilliant people. And when I realized how stupid that whole situation was, it's just like, it's even tough to remember this, but really fight your biases, because no matter, how much noise there is signal there.
Okay, this is really interesting. And I believe this is very valuable advice, because it is true. Most of us, if we notice that the quality of most of the candidacies are poor, we go to another country and we stop checking, right? But we Yeah, we have to commit and to review everything we receive, and then to decide on whether to look for candidates in that country or not. So, from how many countries are there people at Shopify at this Berlin office, for example?
It would be hard to tell, but a lot. I mean, I don't want to make a mistake, but I would like my guess would be 70 people and maybe 15 or 20 nationalities. Like it's just so random.
Wow.
Because you go through all of the applications and you find good people from everywhere, and then it's just a matter of process to bring them in.
Nice.
And again, that was pre-COVID, so we were bringing everyone in. Right now, it's even easier, right? You can find anyone, and through the external employer of record platform, you can hire anyone anywhere. So that's even easier and more relevant right now.
Yeah. And how is this diversity? How was it working? Was everything fluent, or did you face any challenges?
It's not fluent because it's very difficult to fight your biases, because not all of the biases you really know and recognize. There are so many unconscious biases that are there. And if you look into the numbers, a gender split or nationality split or race split, it's still not great. And it wasn't great with Overlord, wasn't, it's still not great at Shopify. It's important that you are like making steps the right direction and actually trying to change something. There are now a lot of good tools and great initiatives that hide, let's say, the nationality or the picture or the name or, so you're sort of just evaluating the actual facts, it somehow helps you fight your own biases. So that's great. Also making sure that the top of the funnel for your hiring is very diverse, right? So sometimes, yes, for a very specific role or skill set, it might be a very limited pool that you're choosing from. But making sure that you have a very diverse candidate pool is super important.
Yeah, of course. If there's language skills, for example, it's not so easy to be diverse then, right? But for other things, I totally agree. It's more like to check the competence. But how are you checking the background of people and the suitability for the position then?
Yeah, so I think it depends a bit on the seniority level. I think, let's say, junior to mid-level people, you can actually chat with them, look into their track record, have reference calls and like all of the standard stuff. And you can pretty much figure stuff out. I think where it really gets difficult, and I actually had this as one of the issues with the hiring or one of the challenges later on, is when you grow and then you start hiring really senior people. Because hiring senior people is like a totally different challenge, because they know exactly how to sell themselves. They know what you're looking for. They know what they need to tell. It's so difficult to really recognize, who is who. And one thing that I think helped me a lot is taking your time and spending time with that person. So not rushing, not making this official, like what you've done and, but more of like, okay, let's go for dinner. Let's hop on the call. And you start chatting about, the market and how they see things. And maybe you tell them your plans and then they give you feedback. And then you see if they're curious, if they are asking questions, if they have interesting insights that you haven't thought of, and so on. So the more senior people, the less you have to follow the standard process. I think that's one way to go. And I think there are people where like you meet them and you start chatting and it feels like, okay, they're talking the same language and they have interest, and like you learn a ton in an hour or 2-hour dinner and so on. So I think with the senior people is building relationship, taking your time, really making sure that you don't make a mistake.
Okay, yeah, this is really great, I believe, because it's even difficult to check the references, right? Because if it's like very senior person, they usually have very good and strong network or relationships, and it's not so easy then to find the information you're looking if there is one. So just to talk and to see how is the communication and whether the person can bring something as addition, it's a great thing. And I wonder how many startup founders or C-level managers actually do that, because usually it's like maybe founders do, but C-level managers, I believe they usually just follow the usual procedures, right? As what you do with less senior people.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's important to remember like that the cost of someone at the a bad hire at the leadership position is like it just so much higher than the mid level. So you have to be extra careful. And a good potential hires, they will want to do the same. They will want to spend time with you. They will want to understand what is this company and who are you and so on. So if they want to go through the process really quick and so on, like that's maybe one of the red flags.
Yeah. I actually had these cases myself when the candidate is super in rush and like pushing, to make the decision to hire or not. And well, there is like kind of no time to check the references and everything, but the candidate, also has to decide whether accept to your offer or maybe others. And then, you rush too much and you see that I would have better check those references, and prolong that time.
And actually, we had the internally a saying, maybe I'll track back a little bit. I think it's important to say and to accept the fact that you're going to make so many mistakes. And it's like statistically, you're going to make probably more mistakes than the good hires.
Yeah.
Like odds are stacked against you. You're going to hire a whole bunch of very bad or mediocre people and so on. So it's very, very difficult to hire good people. And obviously with experience, the chances are increasing, but still, I mean, it's going to be 50-50 or something like that. So one thing that we were saying internally is like, if it's not hell yeah, then it's no. Like if you're not going crazy about the candidate, if there are any sort of like on paper looks good, but the gut feeling is something is off and so on. Like if you're not going crazy, then you don't hire. So I think that's one thing. Because again, the cost of a bad hire is so much, higher than just waiting for a bit more or having a vacancy for longer. So, and then the second thing is during the probation. So once you hire them during the probation period or the first months or for the first half a year, like it should be your honeymoon. So like everything should be absolutely perfect, right? Like for sure, things will start popping up later on, like the rough edges and whatever. But the first months should be like really perfect. Not saying that, they would do they'll have the impact immediately, but everything should look totally on track and so on. And if it's not the case, then like, I think it's just, it's better to, call it a day, say, hey, it didn't work out. And it's not too bad for the person, not too bad for you, and then you go back and try to do that. So I mean, just having confidence when making a call, and then if something doesn't feel right, just calling a day as soon as possible.
What I noticed is that actually people, I'm not saying that everyone, but many people tend to do their best during the probation period, right? And after the probation period, sometimes they kind of relax and maybe more mistakes appear or some, I don't know, not to be so much motivated or something like this. And of course, if it's still the probation period and you see that the person lacks for motivation, so there's no way that it will be better after the probation period, right? So you have to be very careful and not so desperate to believe that maybe later, because now it's too stressful moment,
No, it's a terrible position to be in, but what naturally happens is that you start negotiating with yourself. You say, okay, maybe I didn't do a good job with onboarding, maybe it's this or that. So you start, because I mean, it's very tough to let someone go. It's very it's just hard mentally and so on. So you naturally start postponing that decision. You start negotiating with yourself. So that's why I think you have to, before you even start hiring, you say, okay, if I have any indication that this is not a totally perfect hire, then we sit and chat and figure out what to do.
Yeah, I agree. So what are the other learnings?
So I think that's pretty much it. I think maybe the last small piece, which I hope is obvious, but I think still worth mentioning, is that when you're growing, there will be structures around you and around the processes and around the hiring process as well. So there will be, a talent acquisition team or someone doing sourcing and so on. And I think at some point, the whole hiring process sort of gets decoupled from actual, hiring managers and so on. And I think that's very dangerous. And that's where like companies become super complacent and ultimately fail. So I think if you are a hiring manager, like regardless of where in the company you are. But if you're a hiring manager, then you are responsible for the hire. You're responsible for hiring process. You're responsible for all of the leads that you get. You're responsible for sourcing process. You're responsible for, if you need to make a shortcut, you make a shortcut. If you need to expedite things, if you need to change something, like it's ultimately you, like all of the teams around you, all of the processes, it's only here to support you. But if you have a bad hire, that's your problem. If you don't have any hire, that's your problem, right? If you don't have, anyone at the top of the funnel of the hiring, food chain, then it's your problem. So I think, and this was for me, was very evident when we joined Shopify, because there was so much structure and process there that I couldn't even almost be involved for the first like a month of the candidates process or something, and it was very tough, and ultimately we didn't control what we were getting and what we were hiring and so on, or to some extent, right? So I think this is a very natural tendency. It happens everywhere. You can't avoid that, but you have to be, again, very aware and very quick to respond and really just own the process.
I think this is the best what recruiters would like to hear, right? Because hiring managers' involvement into the whole recruitment process is one of the most important thing in the process, I believe. Yeah. And if hiring managers spend some time, even help, with looking at the candidate profiles, better understand their expectations, and leave the comments after interviews, this is pretty much it, right? It's not so difficult to do. Totally. But yeah, it gives a lot of benefit here.
I think but some hiring managers think that, okay, you're responsible for talent acquisition, so bring the best talent.
Yeah, right? Bring talent to me. Exactly.
But even for the talent, or for people being hired, right? Like it's one thing talking with someone who you're going to be reporting into, understanding the business needs, understanding all of the context and everything is so much more valuable than hiring with the talent acquisition person, right? Yeah. Talent acquisition can give you a high level presentation and so on, but selling on the vision, selling on the idea is ultimately, lies on the shoulders of the hiring manager.
Exactly. One thing is the representation from the company to a candidate, and that direct communication from the very beginning, like from basically selling the job opening to candidates. Yeah. And another thing is that, of course, a recruiter might understand or imagine what are the expectations, but how another person could make the decision, and especially a person not working in your field, right? So it's like it's too complication, and then it's only a game basically, and you're checking, what happens. So yeah, it's especially important. And the other question I wanted to ask you, because and I wouldn't say that so many failures, but I assume there should be, because you grew very fast and you hired many people in a very short period of time. So how to still be motivated, or believing in some success if you fail, or you hire and you fail, right? So how do you manage to be strong?
It's a perfect question. I think it's a question of balance. So if you occasionally happen to hire someone who's really decent, then that helps your mental state, right? If you're like only hiring people and then firing them, then that's a problem, right? And again, like statistically, this is likely what's going to happen because you're going to make mistakes, right? Yeah. But in our case, yes, we made tons of mistakes in the very beginning, and it was very painful. And also it weighted on you mentally, it weighted on the rest of the team, right? Because they see people coming and going. So it was very, very tough. It creates some sort of insecurity, feeling among the team and so on. But yeah, luckily we managed to hire some really, really strong people, and they made like a massive impact on the company. They came in and they changed things, and they owned, different areas of the operations or of the company. And then people saw different, examples of a failed attempt to hire someone and a successful one, and then you ultimately understand that, okay, this is a balance. But again, I think another important point is just staying open and humane. And it's not that you're like hiring and firing. That sounds terrible, right? It's a mutual agreement. Someone believes in your company and you believe in that person, and then you sit down and again, it's not necessarily that the person is not talented or whatever. It might be just the wrong setting. Maybe they can't be efficient maybe you can't give them what they need to be efficient and so on. So just sitting down and saying, okay, well, what do you think? Something is off here. Something is not working. Let's try this or that, or maybe, it's just not a match. So just being open about it and honest.
Yeah, exactly. It's not only hiring manager's decision, right? It's a candidate's decision too. So it's just like maybe there was not enough information from one or to another side, and that's it. Nothing is so wrong about it. And the last question I have, it's about being desperate, right? So you mentioned that it's better not to be, and if especially there's a more senior role, so it's better to invest even more time into the process. But if you need a person right now, right, and you're desperate in having a manager or a senior specialist, and you are desperate because you're working way too much, how not to be desperate and not to run?
Right. So this feeling, if you're growing, never changes, right? You're never not desperate. Like, you're always desperate. You always have gaps. You always have, you need more people, you need more hands, you need more skill sets and so on. So this never changes, just a fallacy that like you will arrive at that point where, now you're going to have like a perfect team and everything's going to be fine.
Okay.
No. So this doesn't change. Second is like, it's better to perhaps use the existing resources, incentivize them and fill in these gaps before, not to rush and not make a mistake. And now, I don't know if I can say this on the podcast, but I'll say it anyways. We say it's better to have a hole than an asshole in the company, right?
Yeah.
So it applies more to, just like bad hires in terms of the, attitude, but this applies more broadly, right? It's better to have a gap in what you need rather than someone who's not qualified to fill in that gap, right? So you're you're not gonna solve the problem, and you're just gonna add additional problem on the problems
even
that you
bigger
already have.
one than you had.
Yeah,
exactly.
So I think that desperation is not a good indication to rush and make more mistakes.
Okay, this is a good example. I will always remember this one in order not to be desperate. Okay, great. So thank you, Andrius, so much for your time and for sharing your story.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for having me.
Thank you to all the listeners. For more podcasts, please visit jobrely.com.